Swastia'a, and welcome to the Justpeace Talanoa Bure at COVID-19. In the recent past, we have witnessed major changes. Climate and environment changes is a priority in Fiji and the Pacific region. COVID-19, an invisible virus, arrived at our shores and in Fiji on March 19, 2020. We thought, like any other disaster, that it may last only for a few days or a week or only impact parts of Viti level. The reality dawned that it was going to be a slow-moving journey. Everything was on shutdown. To start off, schools were shut down for 2 weeks, and then it was extended from March to June. Business houses, churches, roads, cities, and villages were shut down. There were levels of confusions and chaos as people rushed to prepare for the invisible coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19, something we didn't know about that was affecting Fiji and the world for the first time. Our close-knitted rural communities, with our limited infrastructure and in our lack of communications, also adapted to prepare and protect ourselves and our norm, our culture, our vanua and traditional ways of doing. There were reactions to the change, the environment change, and also to social change that exacerbate violence and conflicts at different levels of society. Into July 2020, schools were reopened after more than 70 days without new cases of coronavirus in Fiji. A week later, bubble of reopening and reopened more new cases of coronavirus. And the cycle of reopening begins that involves some risk-taking and also threats to humanitarian response. Transcend Oceania is a regional peace-building organization and development based in Fiji. Building Justpeace Communities in Changing Environment and Climate is a project that brings us to these transitional platforms and most of all to the forefront of COVID-19, supported by a number of regional and international development partners. And in this Talanoa series, we will be presenting stories, experiences, and opportunities to learn more about peace-building initiatives and community engagements from all our local community leaders, women, men, and youths. For Transcend Oceania, as a peace-building organization, we cannot turn a blind eye at the rising conflicts, violence, and trauma during this time of COVID-19. That was a challenge during the shutdown, working through the fragilities of climate conflicts, threads of diversity of cultures, gender, relationships, traditional norms, adapting to the change, creating innovative Talanoa space was important. Engaging at the forefront of recovery as we strive together for inclusive, just peace, and positive development through these changes is important. Talanoa, facing each other on the mat, cannot be avoided by many of us. We Kaiviti especially. What about people with special needs? What does isolation mean for them? This is what Justpeace Talanoa Bure at COVID-19 is about. Join us, and our guests for today's Justpeace Talanoa are from local community leaders and representatives. We welcome Mr. Sailosi Ramatu, the Turangani Koro from Vunidogoloa, and his stories of climate change and relocations, and Ms. Lanieta Matanatabu, who is a research and communication officer for Transcend Oceania, and also a young woman who hails from Kadavu community that was recently affected and faced devastation with the TC Herald during this time of COVID-19. And welcome Mr. Paolo Mbalena Korandawa, the Program Director, Transcend Oceania, who will be moderating this Talanoa.
Welcome to Transcend Oceania's Justpeace Talanoa Bure COVID-19 on Building Justpeace Communities in Changing Climate and Environment. Thank you, Sailosi and Lani, for agreeing to be part of this episode. And I also like to welcome all of you who are listening in and viewing this episode. Perhaps if you could begin by you saying a little bit about yourself, Sailosi and Lani, where you come from, who do you represent into this dialogue process, and what's the role that you play in that community or that organization? Sailosi.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Transcend Oceania in giving me this opportunity today. And also for the viewers, thank you very much for having me in this very important moment. May I introduce myself first? My name is Sailosi Ramatu. I'm representing the village of Vunidogoloa as the village headman. I've been entitled to this role for 21 years.
My name is Lanieta Matanatabu. I hail from the beautiful island of Kadavu. My dad is from Kadavu and my mom is also from Kadavu. So they're both from Kadavu, and here I'm representing Transcend Oceania. I work for Transcend as a research and communications officer.
Welcome to both of you. Sailosi, we understand that your community, the Vunidogoloa community, is the first relocated site in Fiji as a result of climate change. There must have been a lot of issues from that time up until now, but would you like to talk about what's the pressing priority issue for you at the moment?
In the role of headman for this past 21 years, it is mostly on my main priority issues is to talk about the impact of climate change. May I further move into the impact of climate change in the village of Vunidogoloa. Climate change is not a new story to the people of Vunidogoloa. It's what have been experiencing from the past maybe 60 years, started from 1959 onwards. It's a story foretold from our fathers to our parents, and we have been telling the stories to our children about the impact of climate change in our old coastal village of Vunidogoloa. And all these factors and the impacts of climate change that made us displaced to a new land as we are here today.
So it wasn't a new issue for you. It had been an issue that you had struggled with for so many years.
It's been an issue that we've been struggling with, all its impacts. And I really thank for the experience of my communities in how they worked and respond to the impact of climate change.
So what were some of those signs of the changes of the climate change was bringing into the old site before you moved into this new village site?
The stories that have been told by our forefathers related to our parents and to us, that how they experience climate change impacts in our old coastal village of Vunidogoloa, was like they realized the change in our food securities, the source of income, also in their livelihoods within the village. Rise in sea level, flooding, erosion, these are some factors that contributed into the impact of climate change.
Yeah. Thank you, Sailosi. I will come back to you. It's very interesting that you are talking about all this. Lani, you mentioned that you're from Kadavu, but I understand you live in Suva. You must have concerns for the people of Kadavu, particularly in relation to the latest cyclone that hit our country, which was Tropical Cyclone Harold, which came during COVID-19. What would you like to say about this?
Thank you, Paulo. As we all know that our cyclone season is always from November to April every year. And this year in April, Cyclone Harold hit the island of Kadavu. And Kadavu has always been the cyclone path. It goes down to the island. But this year was like a double impact on the island because of COVID-19. What happened was the cyclone damaged the whole island. We're looking at 9 tikinas, the highest being recorded from Rakiraki, Nakasaleka, and Nambukelebu. The damages that the cyclone brought about, it damaged the schools, the homes, churches, church buildings, and in total there was over 57.4% to be exact. We're thankful to the Office of the Commissioner in providing us the statistics on the damages that was done on the island as a result of TC Herald. Yes, so the impact was a bit, the people felt the impact this year because it came during the time of COVID-19. And in terms of the responses, at that time there was inter-island restrictions. So the responses to the island was a bit slow, and the people were they had to wait for a while in order to receive the responses. But we're thankful to the organizations and government ministries who have already gone to the island and provide the responses to the people.
Thank you. We will come back to that. We will take a break now. You were watching Transcend Oceania's Justpeace Talanoa Bure at COVID-19 on building Justpeace communities in changing climate and environment. Join us after this break. Welcome back to the second segment of this episode, where we are in a Talanoa process with Lani and Sailosi, the Turangani Koro from Vunidogoloa in Vakonrove. In the previous segment, you have started to talk about what are some of the critical issues that you currently face. Perhaps in this segment, let's talk about what are the challenges surrounding this key issue. For you, Sailosi, climate change that has resulted in the relocation of your community. And for you, Lani, the recent experience of COVID-19 and tropical cyclone Herald. Let's begin with Sailosi. What are some of the challenges and the conflicts surrounding the impact of climate change and the movement from the previous site to this new location of your village community in Vunidogoloa?
Thank you, Paulo. Maybe when people heard about climate change impacts, they only talking about sea level rise, flooding, erosion, and many other such things like this concerning to the impact of climate change. For us, as we experience what's the reality of climate change has affected our areas, we can talk on some of the social impact of climate change. As for a Fijian protocol, our life is entitled to our land, the land of birth. To be displaced from such occasions like these, as far as climate change is being concerned, we are like going to a new land as foreigners. Yeah. Because the thought of living in our homeland of birth, for us, like there will be our home forever. But to be displaced to a new land, we are like taken as foreigners. Yeah. It takes time for us to relocate. For other old people who are living in the old village site, they were born there. Identities and everything that belongs to them, they thought that they would be living there for the whole of their lives. That's why it takes time for us to relocate, in setting their minds for this relocation process. That's why it took a long time for us on this relocation process from 2006 to 2014. We were able to move up to our new relocation site in 2014.
It took you 8 years to actually decide to move. And so one of the challenges is the difficulty of living behind the place where you were born and how you're connected to the land and everything that connects to your reality and your identity there. Okay, Lani, I understand that immediately after Tropical Cyclone Harold, a lot of organizations, church-based organizations, churches, and even government and international humanitarian agencies have responded to the needs of the people in Kadavu, and particularly responding to the physical needs of the people, the food, the clothes, and all those kind of things. There's usually the impact on the psychosocial aspect of life from a disaster that's not usually considered important during that time. How do you see this? Is this a need for the people of Kadavu after the cyclone?
Thank you, Paulo. The people of Kadavu are resilient because it has been the cyclone path during the cyclone season. But there's still a need for post-traumatic stress to be recognized as an impact during the aftermath of a cyclone. So there's a need for psychosocial support on the people on the island. In that regard, we acknowledge the work, some of the work that has been done in response to TC Harold, the work of organizations such as ICRC, international organizations, Red Cross, Empower Pacific, who usually goes out with the ministries, government ministries, in addressing that side of the impact on the people. We're also thankful for the current Fiji Women's Emergency Fund that has enabled Transcend Oceania to provide that support in terms of trauma awareness and healing program for the people of Kadavu. Yeah, so there's still a need in regard to their long-term sustainability. Yeah?
And so you see this as still relevant, even though it's been after a couple of months now that the cyclone has struck Kadavu. The work around trauma awareness and healing is still relevant at this point.
Yes, Paulo. School is starting, and people are still trying to recover. They're still trying to build their houses, and then the obligation of the schools opening, and some of the schools are still, they're still recovering in terms of building materials. They need building materials. And on the side of the impacts on children, we could also consider that, bring that into consideration, the emotional impact on children and women.
Let's turn to Sailosi again. I was really interested in you talking about how difficult it was for the older members of the community to actually leave that site. The site where they were born, the site that has been part of their lives right throughout. So it was very difficult for them to move. What actually made them move? What was the point of decision for them to say, yes, we have to move?
Thank you very much, Paulo. Since I've said that I've been working in this role as headman for 21 years, and also I've been experiencing with all my village members, working with them during this process of relocation. It is something that we've worked with mostly within the OLIS, on how we have to sit down together as communities to have dialogues, to tell the stories about our future generation, and all these things that we raise to them, make them set their mindset to look forward for the lives of their future generation.
And the movement from the old site
to the new site.
That's a good point to leave it for now. We will take a break. And you are watching Transcend Oceania's Justpeace Talanoa Bure at COVID-19 on building Justpeace communities in changing climate and environment. Join us in the next segment. Welcome to this last segment of this episode. It's been interesting listening to your stories. For you, Sailosi, the movement because of the impact of climate change and the challenges surrounding all that. We now, and for you, Lani, the importance of paying attention to the psychosocial needs of people after a disaster hits a community. So we now move into looking at possible ways of moving forward. What are some recommendations? What are some solutions you think about that could actually help to resolve some of these issues that you have? We can begin with Sailosi by you talking to us about what are some of the things that you think about in terms of moving your community forward in addressing some of these issues that you've talked about.
Thank you, Paulo. Maybe if we are talking about climate change, it's a global issue that has been alarming the world today, and also for our Pacific Island countries, mostly in our various communities in Fiji, which are also affected. For the experience that we Vunidogoloa villages want to share with you, that climate change is real. It is a good time for us to prepare to adapt to climate change. And it means that if you are talking about climate change, we are talking about relocation. Talking about relocation, we have many issues that the other means of our relocation. We have to talk about the land. We have to talk about the financial part of our relocation, and also in our social impacts, we are talking about the people that we are going to move, the number of people with their identities, with their faith, or if there are some of the government assets in the communities. All these issues are needed to be taken to guaranteed talking about any relocation. For the people who are maybe needed to be relocated, we are talking about this experience that we already went through for the relocation process of Vunidogoloa. Yeah.
So the people need to understand that climate change is real.
It's real.
And we've got to start working to prepare and to think around how to work around mitigation and adaptation.
Mitigation and adaptation. Also,
in terms of climate change.
Paulo, it is needed for us to work with partnerships with government, with other organizations, with other stakeholders, to make sure that there are the monetary teams that can help us in any relocation process. That this happened at the relocation process for Vunidogoloa. We thank the government in working with us, in all ministries and other non-government organizations, the church.
So it's really important to work together because climate change is a huge issue that we need to address. Mani, you have talked about the importance of psychosocial work,
Yes.
and your focus particularly on trauma awareness and healing. Talk to us about what you're going to be doing in Kadavu with the assistance from Fiji Women's Emergency Fund.
Thank you, Paulo. For Transcend Oceania, we believe that we're trying to create trauma awareness informed communities to help them to be better prepared for future cyclones or future hurricanes. So this is a program that will be implemented on the island in terms of training, in terms of providing a one-to-one support if there's a need, if the need arises from the communities. So for Transcend, we are working with our first round of visitation will include the Tikina of Ono, Nakasaleka, and Yale. So we're identifying leaders from the villages that fall under those districts. And these leaders, because we live in a communal setting in the Pacific and in a Fijian context, we believe that by providing support and providing training trauma awareness and healing training to these leaders will go and implement it on their different communities or their different villages, and that will help them to be better prepared.
So your focus is on the community, is
Yes.
bring the community together and working with the community with your trauma awareness and healing program.
Yes, we are identifying leaders such as the Turang Nikoros, the Matanitikinas, women's leaders, youth leaders, church leaders. So we'll bring them together and be able to implement the program to them so that they can go and implement it on their people. Yeah.
Time is catching up with us, and it's time to wrap up this segment of this episode. If there was one last thing that you would like to mention to the viewers who are watching and listening in to this Talanoa, what is that important message that you would like to give them?
Maybe I have three messages which I would like to say this afternoon. First, any process we should walk with faith in God. And secondly, unity creates power. And thirdly, the decision making. The brightness of our tomorrow, it depends on our decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sailosi. Lani?
Thank you. I'd just like to say that we're living in a critical time. So just to be sensitive to the needs that are around us, and for the people in Kadavu, they are your relatives who are living in the urban centers, maybe living overseas. You could help support the people back home, and just being able to be sensitive to the needs, especially the psychosocial needs.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you, Sailosi. Thank you, Lani, for your willingness to participate in this Talanoa. And thank you, viewers, for joining us.
As we conclude our Justpeace Talanoa Bure at COVID-19, we are reminded that to enable people living just peace and nonviolence in Oceania, we need to create more awareness about climate change, inclusive consultative decisions within the limited resources we have, and our timely responses to human security priorities, protection and recovery moving on, and in the traumatic cycle of COVID-19, and also the effects of TC Herald. I am Adivasulevu, the Executive Director, Transcend Oceania.